Hey guys, so this video is probably not going to be very interesting to most of you unless you are going through tribunal, you've been through a tribunal, been through DLA process in general, any of those kind of things, then you might be interested. Or just I suppose if you've got no clue about it at all. So yeah, obviously my tribunal was back in October. I got awarded low rate care due to his age of him being 3 because it was a full year that we waited to go to court. So it was based on the fact that he was 3.5, whereas he was actually 4.5 by the time we went to tribunal. So we requested the notes from the judge just to kind of have a full overview of their decision and how they came to that decision. So I'm just going to quickly read through this and yeah, it might be helpful to somebody if they're going to go through a tribunal themselves. So the first page is just it's all legal talk. There's appeal against a decision made by the respondent on, I don't even think that date's wrong. That date's not right, I don't think, because otherwise it makes it exactly a year to when we went to tribunal. I don't think it was the September. They've got it done as October, so that's the first mistake in it. There was, even when they handed me the paperwork in court, my appointee noticed a error in it straight away. We had to send it back to get corrected because they were like, otherwise if it got sent to DWP it could have got rejected by DWP, and I think it was a date then that they'd got wrong. Mrs. R. Watts, the appointee and mother, appealed for the first time. No, first a tier tribunal after a mandatory reconsideration did not change the decision, blah, blah, blah. And then it just says who my advocate is. The tribunal has also had a bundle, which, yeah, we sent them a hell of a lot of paperwork. The tribunal allowed the appeal, which when I first read that in court, I did not know what that meant. I just thought it meant they didn't throw out the case. When it says, if you go back in after your tribunal and it says they allowed the appeal, it means that you've won. Allowed the appeal means, the appeal was the right thing. The decision made on, again, I think that date is wrong, the 24th of the 10th, 18 was set aside. The tribunal decided that Master Jaden Watts is entitled to the care component of disability living allowance at the lowest rate from, 13th of the 9th. Oh, maybe it wasn't when the decision was made. Maybe 13th of the 9th was when the application was made. Maybe it's right. So it will run out on the 12th of September of this year. So it's already been getting on for 18 months because obviously it was a year and it was like 14 months before the tribunal actually took place. But he is awarded this because he requires attention for a significant portion of the day. Attention probably isn't the best word I could use, is it? But supervision, I think, is probably a better word. The tribunal decided that he is not entitled to mobility high rate because obviously, he wouldn't be anyway, even at 5, 6, whatever, he would never be entitled to that because he can physically walk. He's not entitled to mobility component at the lower rate because obviously that begins at 5, so when it gets renewed, hopefully we'll then get mobility low rate. Took into account the facts and circumstances as they were at the date of the decision. So yeah, that's just saying that obviously it was based on him being 3.5, not 4.5. The tribunal paid close attention to the provisions under S.721A, Social Security contributions benefits, which provide that Jaden must be substantially in excess of the normal requirements of a person of his age. So that basically just means to get DLA at all, your child, it's based very much on their age. So obviously the fact that he was still in nappies, the fact that he was on reins, the fact that he needed to be supervised while he was eating, all of those things at 3 they can say are age appropriate. Now that he's pretty much, he's not in nappies full time, but the fact that they could say things that are 3 were age appropriate. When he's 5 and we renew it, then they can't really say that those things are age appropriate because obviously there's a bigger gap between, I hate these the words, but a bigger gap between Jaden and a normal stereotypical child. And then it's just facts, which we don't really need to go through all that, just who he lives with, who his paediatrician is, who his speech and language are. And then there were these bits where I wasn't even completely sure about. So in the Smile, which is like a local special needs charity, in her report she'd put about vacant episodes and whether they were absent seizures, but obviously that's not medically diagnosed. So they obviously have to cross-reference everything. So they were looking to see whether there was anything that they could compare it to in another report. So it says, in her form, Mrs. Watts claims that Jaden has experiences regular vacant episodes where he appears to be engaging or playing but suddenly becomes rigid and vacant. The episodes last less than a minute. The vacant episodes were not referred to in the evidence of the community paediatrician or SALT or in the CCN report. However, the CCN report refers to Jayden appearing to be lost in his own thoughts on occasion and does not pay attention without being addressed directly. Taking into account all of the evidence, it is likely that these episodes are a feature of the acknowledged delay which Jayden experiences in delayed acceptive and receptive language. Mrs. Watts describes other difficulties which Jayden has, including difficulties in transitioning with change, behavioural difficulties in the forms of meltdown, a tendency to run off unless restrained, dietary limitation, sensory overload, night terrors and hyperactivity. At the hearing, Mr. Abbott submitted that this was consistent with the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. The tribunal noted, however, that Jayden has not been diagnosed with this condition by a specialist medical practitioner and that the date of decision under appeal, he has not yet been referred for an assessment on this condition, which obviously now we are hopefully on the way to the umbrella pathway, and in his last paediatrician report, which we hadn't quite got at that time, it does say on the latest paediatrician report that he will be under umbrella pathway soon, which obviously at that time we didn't even have that. So yeah, that's all fine. It's just the fact that, yeah, it's a waiting game, isn't it? So where were we? Furthermore, apart from reference to inflexibility with food, Dr. Bailey does not refer to these difficulties in either of her 2 letters, which love his paediatrician, but they kind of kept saying in court, everything that's discussed with the paediatrician will go into her report. And like, I don't think it does. And like, I've had friends where they've sent it back, and I've never understood this because I didn't think that it was needed, but I've had friends who have sent paediatricians' reports back and insisted that certain things that had been discussed were added into it that weren't put in, and I never kind of understood why, and now in future I will make sure that she notes down every single thing that I say. Like things like night terrors, they've definitely been mentioned to her, but they've not been in her reports, and the judge picked up on that, and the judge was like, well, if it had been discussed it would be in the report. And I'm like, well, I say a hell of a lot. I talk for a good hour when I see the paediatrician. If she put every single, it wouldn't be 2 sides of A4 if she put everything in that was said. Jayden attended Little Blossoms nursery until September 18. Then he attended Sessions with Smile, a charity, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's not the point I was trying to make. The point was, it is in there because obviously they tried to get me saying that he could dress himself, and that is in here somewhere, saying when the nursery referred to him dressing himself, that I argued that, well, if he was he's not fully dressing himself in nursery, he'll be putting maybe his coat and shoes on or something like that. It's not a case of that he can't fully dress himself. I've never, in all of his nearly 5 years, known him to dress himself, from head to toe himself. Never happened. The difficulties which Mrs. Watts described relate to the need for guidance or supervision required for Jayden when outdoors. The tribunal is unable to consider entitlement to the lower age mobility component because Jayden does not meet the age requirement. Jayden does not meet the threshold for the higher mobility component because he does not suffer from physical disability, which gives rise to either an inability or a refusal to walk. In order to meet the threshold for nighttime needs, the tribunal has to be satisfied that Jayden is so severely disabled physically or mentally that he required prolonged or repeated attention from another person at night, or that he requires another person to be awake for prolonged periods or frequent intervals. In the claimant's questionnaire, Mrs. Watts states that Jayden needs help at night once for 25 minutes to manage his nappy change and settle him back down. She also states that Jayden needs watching over for 10 minutes once a night because of no awareness of danger. At the hearing, Mrs. Watts told us that he goes to bed, blah, 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 goes to sleep. Yeah, so basically they're just saying that nighttime supervision, again, because a lot of 3-year-olds would still be in nappies and that kind of thing, that's not considered as sufficient need for any kind of nighttime care. And then night terrors, but they didn't really take any night terrors into consideration because I think it was mentioned in the CCN report, but it wasn't mentioned in any of the other reports, and she kind of dismissed it as not being acknowledged by his paediatrician, which, yeah, was a bit annoying. The tribunal finds it's not unusual for a 3-year-old to wear nappies at night, according to this need for changing nappy at night, and it's not a need which is substantially in excess of the normal requirements of a child of his age. the tribunal acknowledges that Jaden does on occasion suffer night terrors. Oh, okay. I think they're trying to say that it maybe the night terrors were started around the time of the tribunal date, and they wouldn't obviously take into account anything that was after. So I think maybe the CCN report was filed after the original application, and as such, she took it that the night terrors only began after that. So that's that reason. Day needs supervision. In the claimant questionnaire, Mrs. Watts identifies Jaden's need for help in and out of bed, using the toilet, nappy changes, moving around indoors, bathing, dressing, eating, drinking, language communication support. The evidence from the medical and educational professionals indicates that Jaden's day-to-day needs are more evident in home environment, in the school environment. I don't really know where they got that from. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't agree with that, but again, I think that I didn't really read through. If I had read through, I probably have never sent in the Little Blossoms. They seem to keep pulling back to this Little Blossoms thing that kind of seemed to say that he was doing well now and this, that, and the other. He was still completely non-verbal when he was at Little Blossoms. So, yeah, the judge was kind of pulling things out of that, saying, you know, he copes well with this, he copes well with that, and I'm like, no. Jade needs help to wash and dress. He will sometimes refuse to sit in the bath. On occasions, he becomes distressed at the idea of getting out the bath. Doesn't have his hair washed. Just general hygiene and care and all those kind of things are obviously very difficult. Oh, and then it does say about Little Blossoms described him as being able to dress himself, which Mrs. Watts disputed. And then it got into all the times of like how long it take to get him ready, how long it takes to get Ella ready. My only argument was really, well, Ella pretty much has to get herself ready, because they were kind of trying to say, well, how do you have time to get Jaden ready and yourself? And Ella, I'm like, well, me and Ella barely get ready. I like chuck some clothes on and have a shower when I get a chance. Like, Jaden is like what takes time. Jaden has particular difficulty with food. Jaden has safe foods which he will eat, such as yogurt, chicken, bread, banana and apple. He eats one thing from each food group. He is sensitive to food texture and can have meltdowns if there is flavour or texture in his mouth which he cannot cope with. He requires constant prompting to eat, even with familiar food. Takes a long time to chew the food, and occasionally will not finish chewing, and has been known to have food manually removed from his mouth. The paediatrician has not identified any weight problems, and Jaden has not been referred to a dietitian. However, Dr. Bailey reports that he is quite inflexible with food. She reports that Jaden will refuse to eat things if the packaging is changed. He does not eat a balance of foods, but is very particular about what he eats. The majority of his food is bland and beige in colour. The appeal bundle does not contain any evidence from the village's preschool or WALEC which would identify difficulties eating in school. Well, he only took sandwiches to villages and he never ate at WALEC, so there's obviously things that they just miss asking. Little Blossom's nursery states he eats well. Well, that was, I don't know who wrote that report, I need to check that, but there were certainly a hell of a lot of days where he would eat nothing. I would have to send him sandwiches because he couldn't eat the hot meals. There were days where they would pour water into his mouth because he couldn't drink. So yeah, that flippant comment, which I never even thought about, which, I don't know, she maybe put he's getting better with food or something. They took that as being more important than other comments, which is a bit annoying. He has clearly identified difficulties with delayed speech and language, and he has been receiving support from speech and language, which have provided sessions in support and strategies for improved development for implementation at home. The evidence has identified good progress, although Jaden continues to require support as identified by the CCN evidence. In a claimant questionnaire, identifies the need to provide Jaden with extra help for development of his speech and language skills. The tribunal acknowledges that Jaden requires more help than his twin sister with getting out of bed, with toilet needs, moving around indoors, washing and dressing, and supervision around the home. However, the tribunal has to consider whether these needs are substantially in excess to the normal requirements of a child of his age. A 3-year-old child does need help and supervision on these daily tasks, and it is not unusual for some 3-year-olds to present more of a challenge in these areas than others. Having taken that into account, is not satisfied that in relation to those activities, Jaden's needs are substantially in excess of normal requirements of a child his age. The tribunal, however, finds that Jaden does have needs which are substantially in excess of the normal requirements of a 3-year-old child in relation to eating, drinking, speech and language. This is supported with medical evidence and the evidence of the speech and language team and CCN team and Mrs. Watts' evidence. The tribunal finds that Jaden requires attention for a significant portion of the day. According to that, he should be awarded the lowest rate of care. So basically, what they're saying is, yeah, the age-appropriate thing. So that's the annoying thing. Like, if they'd have based it on the fact that he's now 4.5, even if they'd put the first half of his award at lower rate, I don't think they can do that. But if they had been able to put the first half of his award at lower rate and then the second half of his award at middle rate, or even she did say that I could reapply even once the tribunal was over and get it changed, because obviously not even those needs have changed massively, but his gap between him and a stereotypical child has changed quite significantly, or obviously by the time he's 5. So by the time he's 5, he's 5 in February, the award runs out in September. So by September, hopefully we'll be securely on umbrella pathway. His needs necessarily won't have changed that much, but the gap between him and other children will have changed significantly, and obviously he should then be eligible for mobility, which I keep saying motability, and that's obviously like the cars. So yeah, overall I'm fairly happy with it. There's obviously some things which they don't do any research, obviously they just go by what is in front of them on the day. They don't deviate from that, if that makes sense. So it's literally what they read in black and white is gospel, and what you say they'll kind of almost not quite disregard some of what's in the reports if you kind of really argue against it. Yeah, so I chose not to reapply right now because obviously the problem is because it's only on low rate care. Potentially when you reapply, you're reapplying to have it upped, but they can drop it down. So if I was on mid rate, they could drop it to low rate. As I'm on low rate, they could take it completely, and at the moment I do now get disability element of my tax credits. So that is worth more because low rate care is only £23 a week or something like that. But because I get the disability element of my tax credits, I don't want to risk losing that. If it was the 20 quid a week, I would probably risk losing that and fight for the mid rate. But because I also get the tax credit disability element, I don't want to risk losing all of it to then go back to tribunal all over again. You'd think because it's tribunal awarded, DWP wouldn't try and take it, but even the judge said to me, she said, like, obviously now that he is it's very obvious that he is, he deserves this award, and yeah, you could easily go for it to be upped, but there is that risk that DWP would just completely, as ridiculous it is, DWP could completely throw the claim out and could take it off me completely. So yeah, we will wait till September, and we will hopefully then have a happier story that we get mid-rate mid-rate care and low-rate mobility hopefully in September, but yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And this has turned into a fairly long video. I hope it all makes sense, and if you are going through something similar, good luck.